Hi guys, and welcome back to day 22. Quick note, if you want to own this original, I do have it available at my shop, as well as most of my other Inktobers are still available, so if you'd like, there is a link down in the description. But anyways, moving on with this piece. This is one of the ones where, as I worked on it, it gave a lot more of a background story for me, and the details reinforce that a lot more. So with my method, I pretty much always know exactly how the composition's going to look and the details and everything because I use micron pens and usually watercolor, so there's not really room to build and room for forgiveness in the way that I like to do it. So I usually pretty strongly know what it's going to look like, but I find that the areas that I'm most surprised in as far as where I'm building it up and I'm learning things of the piece is the background story or the concept itself. And this was one that I really enjoyed the development of. So at the beginning, it felt like it might be a little bit bland and I wasn't quite sure what was going to make it a special piece. I hadn't quite figured it out yet, but it was time to move on and start making an actual piece because it's Inktober, so I don't have a huge amount of time to dilly-dally while I'm thinking of these things. So I needed to move forward, but I wasn't 100% sure on what I was going to do to make it a piece that I could love and a piece that I could be excited about. But as I worked on it and as I started adding these details, and this is really at the point where I had already had the sketch and I was transferring it over and I'm inking it, is when I started thinking more and more about who this character is and what she's been doing and what her background story is and why she's in this moment in time. And as I was working on it, it felt very fitting that she would be like a supernatural hunter, like a werewolf hunter or something like that. And once that thought came into my mind and as I was working on it, it was so much more fun because I was looking for ways that I can incorporate that kind of a character background into just the details, even because I had already had the basics of this one worked out. Well, pretty much everything of this worked out, but the more that I could hint at that kind of a background and that intention behind this character, the more I really enjoyed working on this piece. I find that the pieces that grow with me as I'm working on it, those are the ones that I feel most in love with, I guess, most passionate about the process, because I do feel like I'm learning, I'm feeling more attached with it as I'm building on it, and it just really was a fun experience to be able to turn it into something that I was more excited about than I was at the beginning, which is always better than starting with something that I'm excited about and then losing interest in it. But yeah, I think that it did teach me that I would like to move in a direction where I think a lot more about the story behind it. I do feel like I'm very story oriented when it comes to things that I consume, the media and the entertainment that I enjoy. I want things that give me a really good story, but I think that that's kind of lacking in my art. I think that in general I try to get it in there, but I think that there's a lot more opportunity to get this narrative into each piece if I'm really using my imagination and thinking through the characters before I'm even working on the final. That way I can really just nail down all these details and get everything to work the way I want it to. But yeah, I do think that creating more of a story as I'm sketching before I'm really nailed down on the details will help me be able to be a lot more attached to these pieces. So as I was transferring this piece from the sketch into the final, this is one of the ones where there was a few nuances that I definitely missed out on. I didn't quite get it the way I wanted it to, specifically in the eyebrows and the eyes themselves. I think that the gesture and the emotion just got a little bit lost. I do struggle with that a little bit. I think it's a little bit hard because I'm coming from sketching digitally where I actually have this very expressive brush. It changes the size very easily and it's also textured, so it's really easy to make these really dynamic lines. And when I'm sketching, particularly for this one, I created this really, I think it's interesting, I enjoyed it, under eye, like this dark under eye circle kind of a look with this brush and how I created it in the sketch. But it's very much like an apples and oranges almost. Like as I'm turning it into the final, I'm transferring it into a very different medium. I'm using this very thin micron, which is very controlled and very sharp and precise, which means it's not nearly as expressive as the brush that I sketched with. And there are a lot of ways around it, but I'm struggling a little bit with adding details with the Inkwash, because that's usually what I would do in that kind of a situation when I'm working with my watercolors. But I've actually been surprised at when I'm using this ink for ink washes, when I've gone in to add these details like that, where I didn't necessarily want to put them in the line work, but I did want to bring them into the final, they are not nearly as precise as I want them. They seem to bleed out a little bit into the ink washes surrounding it, and it's not as crisp and pristine as I want it to be. So I knew going into this one that I would definitely be building up that kind of a shape and that look in the eye, and it would be there, but it wouldn't be quite the same as it was in the sketch. And that is definitely the main reason why I really try to think of the final as it's a different piece. The sketch is a building block, but once I get it transferred, for the most part, I put the sketch away and then I only focus on the finish. That way I don't sit there and lament over these lost details that I'm just so sad didn't get into the final, when really I can be happy about the good things that are happening. So that just helps me not get distracted by these things that I wish were there and I might keep trying to fix, which ultimately usually I end up pushing it too far and messing it up. So that is one technique that I've learned, is that I need to stop comparing and stop trying to fix things that aren't necessarily wrong, just different. And that actually has really improved my pieces. And this piece, I think, definitely went through a quote unquote ugly painting phase. And that is definitely something that happens with so many artists and so many paintings, and it is 100% okay. And I think that once I learned of that and learned that that's a thing that the artists go through, that has really helped me push beyond it. But basically it's just many paintings go through a point where when you look at it, it looks like it's going wrong, like it's absolutely not going to turn out, but it's only because you're on one step, but the next step may be the step that refines it to the point that it looks sharp and it looks clean. And this one, it definitely had a point where it felt a little bit too flat, I guess, and just there were some rough details that I needed to fix. I accidentally put a very splotchy patch of shadow on her forehead, and I tried to mop it up, but it still had this outline from the ink wash on it. So ultimately I had to try to find a way to fix it by making the shadow even larger on her forehead and then adding a little bit of this like texture, like she's scratched there. And ultimately it turned out a lot better than it was before. So that was a little bit of a happy accident, but I had a moment where I started getting really nervous. I was afraid I was ruining it, and at that moment I had already ruined it, and that if I keep pushing it, I will make it worse. So I had to take a minute to just recollect my thoughts and not rush into trying to fix this problem before I think through the correct course of action. And that has been a huge improvement to my work, especially, well, really mainly traditionally when I'm working, taking a second to really think through what am I going to do to fix this issue before I just jump to the first thing that I thought of. This has absolutely improved the steps that I take to make things work better. And I was actually really happy with the details that I could put in with my white gel pen on this one. So when I did the moon, I totally didn't even think about it, but I just inked it with my black micron pen. But since it ended up being a white moon, that black outline just really flattens it immediately, and it takes any sort of immersion away from that. So I took my white gel pen and I just outlined it very carefully around the black line, and because it wasn't 100% opaque, it still had this slight soft gray outline to it, which was perfect, and it immediately fixed that issue. So the moon just sunk back in where it needed to be, and it gave it that dimension back. So it was actually a really nice effect. It was accidental where I didn't really think should have put the black, but in the end the combination of the two created this really nice effect that I liked. And that is it for today's Inktober. I do post daily Inktober videos, so I'll be back tomorrow with another one. And like I mentioned, there's a link down in the description that'll take you to my art shop where I have the original of this one, as well as prints and prints of lots of other much more colorful artworks. If you'd like, that is a great way to help support me and this channel. And yeah, that is about it for today, so I'll see you guys tomorrow with my next video.